Everyone, Jerry Bellini here. Welcome to the kitchen at the tiny house. Today we are not going to be cooking food, we are going to be cooking cloth. And by cooking cloth, I mean we're going to be dyeing wool. I'm going to start by telling you about this book that I love, and it's called Beautiful Wool in the Dye Kitchen with Lisa Ann Miller, and I am going to put that in the description box below with a link that you can take a look at that on Amazon. And we are also going to be using acid dyes, and the company that I like and use is Cushings Perfection Dyes. And they are created specifically for dyeing wool, mohair, silk, so protein based. And these are synthetic dyes which are chemically manufactured. I would love to try doing natural dyeing at some point, but I did wind up with all these packets of these wonderful Cushing dyes last year. There's a wool store not too far from my house in Pennsylvania, and she has the most gorgeous wools there, and she does her own dyeing. She does chemical and natural, and she uses these dyes for her chemical based dyeing, and her cloth is really beautiful. Her natural dyeing, she says, tends to fade. And so there's people that, you know, just really want natural products. And so she sells that wool to them. And then, you know, if you want to make sure that the colors stay vibrant and true, you really need to go with something chemically manufactured like these dyes. And I really like them. They have worked really well for me. And they are so easy to use. So the first thing we're going to go over is the supplies that you need to dye. And as you see, I'm sitting in my kitchen, so I am going to do it inside. And I am very careful about what I do when I'm eco-printing. I never eco-print in the house. I do that outside. But this dyeing process is perfectly fine to do in your house, which is great. It did get a little cooler down here at the beach, so I thought this would be a perfect opportunity to do some of this dyeing. So let's go over the supplies first. So you are going to need the dye, okay, the chemicals, and you'll have to, I'll put the name of the dye in the description box, but you'll have to Google that. They do not have that on Amazon, so I cannot provide a link for you for that. But I see it all over the internet. So you'll need some dye, and you'll also need wool, obviously, or silk, or whatever it is you want to dye. We're going to dye wool. And I bought a huge bolt from this gal. She was nice enough to let me buy a bolt. I bought that like about 2 years ago. And yeah, I have a lot of it. So I'm going to do quite a bit of it. Today, for this demonstration, we're just going to do 1 fat quarter. All right, the pot. I like a white enamel pot because you can see what's in the pot. So if you're using a light color dye or a dark color dye, you can see it really clearly, and you can see when it's absorbing into the cloth, and it's very exciting. If you use like, for example, a black canning pot, those are enamel. You can't see anything, so I don't recommend you use that. However, if you can't find a white enamel pot, you can also use a stainless steel one. So there you have that. Now, as far as the pots that you're using and the measuring spoons and all that stuff, keep that stuff separate. It's recommended that you do not use it again in your kitchen when you're cooking. So although when I was researching the acid dyes, they're saying that they're not toxic, but you know, I don't know, there's chemicals in there, so I don't want to eat those chemicals. I don't want you to eat them, so please just be careful with that. As far as the water that you're left with, the dye water that you're left with in the pot when you're finished, you can pour that down the sink. So some people say just run your tap water and pour it down the sink, and others say put a little bit of baking soda in the dye pot and then pour it down the sink, along with some cold water running at the same time. So you want to dilute it. I'm going to leave that up to you. I do pour it down the sink. I do not use the baking soda, but I am going to leave that up to you. The enamel or stainless steel 4-quart pot, and that's big enough to do a fat quarter. All right, so if you want to do more, then you'd want to get a bigger pot. You're going to need some teaspoons. So you're going to need 1/4 teaspoon and 1/2 teaspoon, and you're going to need a 4-cup glass measuring cup. So you want to use glass. You're going to need some white vinegar and a heat source, whatever that one, you want that to be. So you can do this outside if you have an outside cooker, or I'm going to do it on the stove because, like I said, it's okay to do it in the house. You're going to need some wooden spoons. You'll need a rectangular pan to put your wool in after it has been dyed and in the hot water to cool. So you remove it from the water and put it in a pan to just sit there and cool. And so I would recommend a pair of tongs to get it out of the pot. And also rubber gloves are not a bad idea. All right, you're going to need a bucket. Okay, now do you see there's a bucket in my sink right there? It's a 5-gallon bucket. I have it full of warm water, and you're going to put warm water in that bucket, and you're also going to put a little lemon joy in that bucket. Now, I have not been able to find lemon joy in the grocery store, so I ordered it online. I will put a link in the description box below where I found it on Amazon. Maybe you have it in a store near you, but I haven't been able to find it in the store. I already said tongs. All right. The dye powder. This is powder, and it comes in these envelopes, and it has a name of the color. It has the color name on there. Do not remove the dye from these envelopes. Leave it in the envelope and take out what you need. So depending on the recipe, 1/2 teaspoon, 1/4 teaspoon, and leave the rest in the envelope. And then what I do is I put all my envelopes, has a little flap on the back. I put all my envelopes in a plastic bag when I'm finished and keep the bag sealed so that moisture doesn't ruin the dyes. Now, sometimes the dyes will get cakey in there because some moisture did get in there. It's perfectly fine and you can still use it. You just have to very gently break the cakey apart. So I think we covered, did I say vinegar? Yes, we need vinegar as well. And an electric water tea kettle would be amazing. And that's because you heat the temperature of the water up to boiling and it stays hot, and you use the water from the electric kettle, and I have those things right over here, to mix with your dye. So the first thing you're going to do, and we're going to really get started in a second, but you're going to mix your dye powder in a glass jar and you're going to use the hot water out of the kettle. So you make sure that that is thoroughly mixed and dissolved, okay, because it's granules. If you don't, when you go to put it in your pot, it's going to be the granules, and then you're going to see these little tiny speckles on your wool, and that's not good. You just want the color on your wool. All right, I think I covered it all. So let's get started, and I'll explain exactly what I'm doing as I go along. So the first thing you want to do is soak your wool in the bucket. So I put about that much water in. It's really a little more than to cover it. And then I put some of the lemon joy in there, swish that around, and then put my wool in there and let the wool sit in there for at least 30 minutes or a few hours, or overnight is fine too. So you can do this the night before. And the water has to really permeate the cloth. Okay, and now you don't have to stir it up or do anything like that. Now, if you want your wool not to get felted and you want it to keep the integrity of how it is when you first started, then don't swish it around a whole lot. But I like felted wool, so I don't have a problem swishing it around. In fact, when I'm all finished, I throw mine in the washing machine and then in the dryer. So this is the first thing you do. So while this is sitting and soaking up the water for 30 minutes, you're going to turn your kettle on. And you're going to bring this to a simmer. So I leave the lid on, and it's not quite at a simmer yet. Okay, we're going to start with 2 cups of boiling water that I got out of this electric kettle. I'm going to put this water into this container because this is my kitchen container, so I don't want to get any chemicals on that. So now I'm going to use plum, and it's in these little plastic bags. And I measured out 1/4 of a teaspoon per my directions. So now I'm going to stir it so that all the powder granules dissolve. And meanwhile, I have right here in the sink, in the bucket, I have my wool has been soaking in warm water with the lemon joy. It's been soaking for a while, quite a while, at least an hour. So a minimum of 30 minutes. Here I am. A minimum of 30 minutes. And you can prepare it over and leave it overnight. So just make sure this is really stirred, because you don't want any little granules. When you put your cloth in, it will make a little mark on the cloth if it's not totally stirred. And meanwhile, I'm going to turn you around. On the stove, I have a white enamel pot, and it's got 2 quarts of water in it, and the water is steaming. I don't know if you can see the steam coming off there. I'll get you a little closer in a minute. You don't want the water to be boiling. You just want it to be steaming. So you don't want to see any bubbles in there, but the steam is a good thing. So now we're going to pour the dye in there. And we're also going to add 1/8 of a cup of vinegar. And we're going to give this a stir. This in the sink, and now we're going to add the cloth. That's been soaking, and I'm going to squeeze out the excess water, but you don't have to go crazy. And I'm actually going to put it in like this. So this is considered the dipping method, where you put it in slowly. And depending on how much of a gradation you want, you could put it in really slow. So I'm really looking more for a mottled effect. So there it is. And now going to just push it down into the pot, and I'm going to stir 2 times in one direction, and well, that was like 1.5. And I'm just going to stir once in the other direction. I really would like it to be a little more mottled. All right. And now I'm just going to leave it sit there for 20 minutes. And I'm going to keep my eye on it. I'm going to keep my eye on it because I don't want it to boil. And I can see the steam is still coming off of it, so it is simmering. It is still simmering, which is what I want it to do. I'm just going to leave it sit there 20 minutes. We'll be back. So I just wanted to show you the dye pot. I did remove the cloth. It's right there. And I'm surprised that there's still all this color in here, because normally the cloth soaks up most of the dye, and this time it didn't. So it's always a new experience every time I do something. I have a feeling it's because I only put 1 piece of cloth in here, and normally I put a few pieces in. And so the dye really only could go so far into 1 piece. So that being said, I thought just for fun, I would throw some cotton in here. So I did, and I already took the cotton out and it's outside. I'll show that to you in a minute. But this is supposed to be for wool. So I thought, oh, it's not going to do anything to the cotton, but it did. So I don't know. I don't always know the science behind things that I do, unfortunately. I just do them and enjoy the process. So I would tell you to experiment. So now this has to be rinsed, and then I'll hang it outside to dry. I just wanted to show you the difference between the pot of water that I had put a few pieces of cloth in and the dark plum one that was really still dark. So this one soaked up more of the color. So that is exactly what happens when you don't put enough cloth in. You are left with a lot of color in your pot. I hope that helps. So here's the plum cloth that I just showed you a few minutes ago in the house. It's out here, it's drying, and I had done another piece, and this for some bizarre reason is called scarlet, but it doesn't look like scarlet to me. It looks like pink. And I did throw these 2 pieces of recycled wool, these are from a coat that I took apart, in the dye bath because I saw so much color still left in there. And so you can see I got a lighter shade of the purple. It's plum, it's called plum. And now I'm going to show you the cotton cloth that I threw in as well. So here's the cotton. This is a cotton canvas, and this is just a lining, piece of cotton lining, and this was a piece of quilter's cotton. So you see the dye took to that as well. So I would say, you know, if you have colorant left in your pot, that you should throw some other things in there and see what happens. Why not? So this has already been rinsed, but it is still wet. So tomorrow it'll be dry, and I'll show it to you. I'll take a picture of it tomorrow. So it's very late in the day, and you can see I have all my kitchen lights on, but I wanted to come back on and just tell you a few things before I upload this video to YouTube. One is that I love this book, okay? So it's got a ton of recipes in it, and I actually followed the recipe on page 17. So each recipe, you create just a slightly different variation with the technique. And it's really good fun. So I would highly recommend that you get this book and try some of the recipes. But meanwhile, if you just want to get your feet wet, you can order 1 package of the dye, the Cushings dye that I told you about. And I'm sure you have vinegar, and really you need some lemon joy. But honestly, if you don't have the lemon joy and you don't want to get it, just use some dishwashing soap and a little bit. There is no exact formula for how much dishwashing soap to put in the bucket when you're soaking the wool. Just give it a squirt, and and don't worry about it. I did want to say, just experiment, just have fun and play with the technique. And it's a very basic, simple technique. And if you are really interested in it and you really want to go further, then maybe you want to consider doing some natural dyeing. I have a really simple PDF in my Etsy shop, and it's 4 ways how to naturally age and dye fabric. And it might be a really simple way for you to get your feet wet. It uses things that you already have in your kitchen. I left the link in the description below. And there's so many really fun things you can do with this process. I go to the thrift store and buy a lot of recycled wool clothing, and you can over dye that. So if it's already a color but it's a light color, you can over dye it. I bought an old wool blanket at a flea market. I have that laying on the floor. I'm going to keep dyeing. I'm going to dye tomorrow. I'm going to do it all day because I have a lot, and I have some. Let me show you. I have some textured wool here. I don't know if you can see the texture in there. This is new wool. This is lovely when you dye it. I'm going to do some of this tomorrow. I'm going to try to put some of it in the Etsy shop because, like I said, I have this whole entire bolt. I'll never use it. So what I would recommend you do is make yourself a cheat sheet so that you don't get overwhelmed when you're doing this. And just write down. That's what I do. I just write down the high points of the whole thing. Like, pre-soak. Fill your enamel pot halfway with water. It's basically 2 quarts if you're using a 4-quart pot. You know, heat the water to a steam, and just write these things down so you can easily just go down the list and make sure that you've done each thing, because it could get a little you could get a little flustered when you the very first time you do it. Once you do it once, you'll be like, this is a piece of cake. So the dipping method that I was talking about when I put the piece into the plum dye, you're supposed to do that really slowly so that it's actually giving you gradations of color. And I didn't. I just kind of went whoop and just put it in. So of course, you know, the plum piece of cloth, it was a little mottled. I don't know if you could see that on the clothesline, but it definitely wasn't. It didn't have a gradation of color. So anyway, I'm just trying to give you a few of the tips of things the way I did them. And I play. That's what I do. And I would suggest you do the same. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll give it a try. It really is quite easy. And especially if you're just going to do a few pieces, get yourself all ready, get all your stuff, gather all your supplies, put them in a box, and then just have at it and just spend the morning maybe doing some dyeing. And normally I put more than 1 piece in the pot, and I use a much bigger pot. So I shove a lot of stuff in the 1 pot, and that gives you a mottled effect. The more cloth that's in the pot, the less that the cloth can move around, okay, and soak up the dye, the more of that mottled effect you're going to get. Now, if you want a solid effect, then just put the cloth in, stir, you know, and stir it and stir it and stir it and stir it to make it so that the color goes everywhere. I hope that all makes sense. And thank you so much for watching. I always enjoy creating these videos for you. And don't forget to keep moving, just play, no rules, and remember to be grateful for something today. I'm always grateful for you. And I am grateful that I got to do some dyeing today. This was a lot of fun. So I will see you again in a few more days, and I hope you have a great night. Bye for now.